بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد سيد الأولين والآخرين وحبيب رب العالمين. Praise be to Allah, the Lord of the universe. We ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to raise the rank of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and to protect the nation of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam from that which he alayhi salatu wassalam feared for it. Our Shaykh Abdullah rahimahullah said, الرزق مقسوم الرزق مقسوم. He said, الرزق مقسوم على حسب ما كتبه الله في اللوح المحفوظ. That a rizq, a person's sustenance, the wealth that they will receive, what they will eat, what they will be sustained with, this, it will occur, a person will attain it just as it was written in the guarded tablet, just as it was written in al-lawh al-mahfuz. And what's important to know that whatever Allah eternally willed to be, then this is what will be. Whatever Allah has willed eternally, this will never change. This will never change. This is the belief of the Muslims. There is nothing that a person can do to make it change. So the amount of food, let's say, or wealth, let's say, that you are to receive until the day that you die, this is known, and it has been written in al-lawh al-mahfuz, and it will not change. It will not increase, and it will not decrease. But one of us does not know how much has been written. Will we starve to death? We do not know. Will we die of thirst? We do not know. Will one of us become very wealthy in the future, or will one be struck with poverty? We do not know. So because we do not know, we use the means that we were taught that are permissible to acquire wealth, to acquire money. And through that we would acquire food. We would attain food that we would eat. This is the belief of the Muslims. There is nothing that you can do to get more than what you have eternally been willed to get. Even if a person was to gather every company in the world or every army in the world to try to extract even one atom's weight more of rizq, they would not be able to. Because it hasn't been willed by Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala for a person to receive more than what has eternally been willed. So they will not receive more, and they will not receive less. Again, because we do not know how much we will receive, we take the means to try to support ourselves, to sustain ourselves. We try to support our families, and so on. Like, for example, a person might recite Surah Al-Waqi'ah in the night once. This is known uh, to increase in a person's rizq. Increase in what sense? Meaning for it to be more, for a person to receive more money, for example, than they do right now. And this, if it does occur, then that doesn't mean that what's in the Lawh al-Mahfuz has changed. No, this would have been written in the Lawh al-Mahfuz. This person will recite. He will start to recite Surah Al-Waqi'ah, and because of that, he will receive more than he was receiving before. And all of that is in Lawh al-Mahfuz. Likewise, there are ayahs that a person can recite after each obligatory prayer that are known among the Muslims to attain in the matters of rizq. So that doesn't change anything. That doesn't change anything that has already been written. If you recite one of those ayahs and then you start receiving more, that's because it's already written that that would happen. You would recite and you would receive more. So it's already written. So he said, Rahimahullah, Al-Rizqu maqsoom. It has already, in one sense, been distributed. Meaning because the knowledge of how much every person is going to receive, this is known and it is written. It is known to Allah and it is written in Al-Lawh al-Mahfuz. على حسب ما كتبه الله في اللوح المحفوظ. So one of us, we use the means. Like for example, we make dua so that we are able to attain enough to be able to provide for our families, to be able to provide for those upon whom, or rather, to provide for those whom it is obligatory upon us to provide for. It might be the case that one of us goes out to work, and through this means we acquire money with which we provide and fulfill our obligations, and therefore are not sinful. And it might be the case that one of us does not work, and yet his rizq or her rizq has been written, and while they are sitting at home and not working, their rizq comes. They might receive a lot of money. But what is encouraged is for a person to go out and seek, for a person to go out and use the means to acquire so that they can provide. Acquiring the halal, acquisition of halal, and the key word here is halal. Acquisition of the halal as opposed to the haram is an obligation upon every Muslim. Meaning, if they want to acquire, if they want to get a job and they want to work, then doing that in a halal way, this is an obligation. This is an obligation because the other side is that a person would work and do a job that is haram, and then they would receive money that is haram. So what's obligatory for a person who wants to work is to do a job that is halal. Why might a person work? Why might a person try to use the means to acquire money? Because they have dependents. He, for example, has a wife who he is obligated to provide for on a daily basis. He might have non-pubescent children who he is obligated to provide for on a daily basis: food, shelter, clothing, and so on. He might have parents who are poor, and if they are poor and there is nobody else who can fulfill their financial needs, then he or she, as the son or the daughter, is obligated to provide for them if they are poor. The same goes for the grandparents. The same goes for a relative if he is poor or she is poor. Then all the other relatives who are obligated to keep ties with this person need to provide. It is an obligation, a communal obligation, for them to provide for this person who is poor. So this is why a person would work, so that they can fulfill their obligations. So when it is said, الرزق مقسوم, that the rizq of a person, it is already written down. This isn't an encouragement for a person not to use the means, not to go out and work. This is not an encouragement for a person to stay at home and not work. This is not an encouragement for a person to stay at home and hope for the rizq to come to him or her while there are financial obligations upon them towards others, towards their dependents. Some of the rizq of a person might be written for them, and what is written for them is that they will receive it through the means of striving for it, going out, working. And that's how they will receive some of their sustenance. And some of their sustenance might not be like that. It might not be like that. They might be at home and it might come to them, it might fall into their lap. But it's important to know that the pious people, and not the pious people, the awliya, and likewise the prophets, they would use the means. They would use the means. This is how they sought to attain rizq, by working. Likewise, in terms of medicating themselves, looking for medicine, seeking a cure, they use the means. And likewise in war, they used the means, which is also a great sign of the strength of their reliance on Allah, is that they could have said, we're just going to raise our hands and ask Allah. And this is a good thing. This shows great strength in relying on Allah, Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. For a person to say, I'm not going to use the means, but I'm going to ask Allah, and then I'm going to wait, inshaAllah. This is not something bad, but they didn't do that. They could have, and it is something good if someone was to do that. But if we follow in the footsteps of the prophets, then we would see that they did not do that. Rather, for example, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when it came to the battle of Uhud, he sallallahu alayhi wasallam wore 2 sets of armor. And then on top of it, he wore a set of armor to protect his body, alayhi salatu wassalam. And he, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, is the greatest creation of Allah, and he is the most reliant of the creations of Allah on Allah. He has the strongest tawakkul, on Allah, which means that the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he could have fought, for example, and relied on Allah, but he as to teach us that it is something that is something that is good to use the means. He wore 2 sets of armor, alayhi salatu wassalam. Zakaria alayhi salam, as an example, he was a carpenter, so he worked. Dawood alayhi salam, also the Prophet of Allah, made armor. He made armor for when people engage in warfare, alayhi salam. So these prophets and the pious people, they used the means. They also drank and they also ate. So these are means. One of us might say, well, today I'm not going to eat. I'm not going to prepare any food for myself. I'm going to make dua right now. I'm going to ask Allah to sustain me. And it might be the case that throughout the day, somebody brings them a sandwich. Fine. This shows reliance upon Allah. But someone who doesn't do that, someone who uses the means, is not considered to have a weak reliance on Allah. Like, look, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam wore 2 sets of armor. That doesn't mean he has a weak reliance on Allah because he actually wore armor instead of not wearing armor and going out into the battlefield like that. Or that the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam used a sword. This is using the means. He is not considered to have had a weak reliance on Allah because he didn't go out in the battle without a sword. So a rizq is going to be distributed to everybody just as or just with the amount or just the amount that has been eternally known to Allah and that is written in the Lawh al-Mahfuz. And that doesn't mean, that's not an encouragement for a person to not strive. It doesn't mean that a person shouldn't strive to seek rizq by working to fulfill their obligations. But if a person is able to work, they are able to acquire money, to feed their dependents, to provide their dependents. This person was able, but what did they do? They didn't work. They were able to work and they need to provide, but they don't work. Hence, they don't provide, then they are sinful. They are sinful because this person might say, well, I'm not going to work and I'm just going to make dua. For you, that's fine. You make dua, okay. But when you're not fulfilling the obligation daily of providing for your wife, providing for your dependents, then you are falling into sin. So such a person, he's leaving out an obligation or a few obligations. This is the one, and the one who has dependents. As for if a person, let's say they were single, so they are not married, and they don't have that kind of responsibility. There is nobody who they need to provide for. They don't have a wife, they don't have young children. They might say, and their parents are not poor, so they are not in need. Such a person might say that today I will go to my dad's house and I'll eat there today. And tomorrow I'll go to my brother's house and I'll eat there. The day after tomorrow, I'll go to my sister's house and I will eat there. Such a person is not neglecting any obligation, is not neglecting any obligatory provisions, because there are no such obligations upon him. His mother and father are both solvent, they are not poor, and he doesn't have any children that are non-pubescent that need to be provided for. So he doesn't work. He doesn't work. And he does, as I said, for example, he eats here and there and there. And everybody is accepting for him or her to do that. He is not sinful. He is not sinful because he's not missing any obligations. But again, this person is encouraged to work with a good intention. So that if one was to work, for example, and earn, then obviously they shouldn't have the intention to commit sins with this money that they gather. Rather, if they work, then this money can be spent on the poor Muslims, or this money can be donated for the sake of Allah, for the betterment of the Muslim community. Perhaps there are schools, there are education centers, there are projects that the Muslims are engaged in that need some financial aid. Such a person is encouraged to work. Remember, this person, there are no such financial obligations upon him. No wife, no young children, and the mother and the father are not poor. So this person should work so that he can help spread the religious knowledge, so that this person can help protect the Muslims against a lot. With this money, this person would be able to do that. And by that, this person would be doing a lot of good, and they would receive an enormous reward. An enormous reward. Then the Shaykh said, الرزق ليس مقيدا بالدراسة. That a rizq, it's not tied to having studied. Meaning, it doesn't mean that, oh, if you've studied, then you will earn and you will acquire money. بل يوجد من معه شهادتان أو ثلاث شهادات ولا يجدون عملا. He said, because there are people who have a degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, so they are very qualified in that the academic sense, but they can't find a job. He said, المطلوب من الإنسان أن يتقي الله بأداء الواجبات واجتناب المحرمات. What a person should do is fear Allah, perform the obligations, and stay away from the haram. لا بد أن يصل الرزق الذي كتبه الله. That rizq that is written for this person will reach this person. Allah did not reveal in the Quran, nor did the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam say that if you have, for example, if you have a degree, then your rizq is guaranteed. There are engineers, there are doctors, there are people who are qualified. Some might call them overqualified even, that sit at home, that don't have a job now, that can't find a job. And then there are people who, for example, are married they have children, and they didn't get a degree, for example, but they work day and night. They perform the obligations, they stay away from the haram, and they protect themselves, their family, their children, and they have a lot of rizq. They have a lot of halal money. Neither did they study, nor do they have a degree, for example. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, ليس الغنى عن كثرة العرب وإنما الغنى غنى النفس. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said that being wealthy or being rich, it's not based upon the amount of commodities that you have, the amount of land you have, the number of houses you have, the number of cars, the number of rooms in your house, the number of leather sofas, the number of cups, the number of different types of plates with different lines on them. ليس الغنى عن كثرة العرض إنما الغنى غنى النفس. Rather, being content with what one has, this is wealth. And he said alayhi salatu wassalam in a different hadith, نعم المال الصالح للرجل الصالح. That money, if a person is pious and they have been given money, then because they know how to use this money in the right way, in a way that Allah accepts, in a way that is not sinful, then what a good money, in one sense, what a good money this money is, this wealth is, as opposed to other people who use money for haram. The Shaykh said, من أجل كثرة المال الناس يرسلون أولادهم إلى بلاد بعيدة حتى يطلع ولده غنيا من دون أن يعلموهم الدين. He said, because of this, many people, because of a lust for a lot of money, because of a lust for a lot of money, many people send their children to other countries so that they can become rich, so they can study and then become rich without teaching them the religious matters, without teaching them the creed of the Muslims, without teaching them the core matters of the religion with which they'd be able to protect their iman, without teaching them then also how to pray, how to fast, and so on. This is what concerns them. This is what worries them and troubles them and keeps them up at night. That their children are comfortable financially without teaching them the religious knowledge. حتى يطلعوا مثقفين أغنياء. What concerns them, what is a priority, is that their children are seen as cultured. They know about different societies. They know about the different habits of people. And they are wealthy. He said, هذا فساد النية. This is a corrupt intention. He said, this is a corrupt intention for a person to do that. This does not mean that this is not a dispraise of a person wanting to have a lot of money with a good intention, like what was mentioned. A person might want to have a lot of money so that they can support the spread of Islam, the spread of the creed of the Muslims, helping the Muslims. If a person has this desire, to have a lot of money for this purpose. This is the drive, that they want to support the religion of Allah, al-Islam. Then this is something that is good. But when money is involved, our Shaykh mentioned, when money is involved, then many people become, it's hard for them. It's hard. When money is involved, then it changes people. And there is also a sin, which is for a person to have this lustful desire to be rich so that they can commit such and such sin with the money that they acquire, and such sin. So they want to be rich so that they can commit certain sins. One of them being showing off. One of them being showing off, buying expensive items and then showing them off to other people. Buying an expensive vehicle and then driving around just so that people look at it. This is pride. And this is a major sin. Competing with other people to see who can buy the biggest house, and then inviting people over with the intention, with this drive, that I'm going to show them around so that they can see how big my house is, with this intention that I'm going to show off my house, literally. This is also a major sin. So it's not haram. It's not haram for a person to want to have a lot of money. This is not haram. It depends on why. And most people, and this is fact, most people who want a lot of money, they don't want it for religious purposes. They don't want it for the reasons mentioned that would be rewardable. So the rizq of a person does not change, meaning that what is written for a person, that they will receive it, that is what they will receive. They will receive no more and they will receive no less. What is in the guarded tablet, al-Lawh al-Mahfuz, it will not change. It is not true what some people claim, that some of the awliya can change what is in al-Lawh al-Mahfuz. This is not true. Because what's written in al-Lawh al-Mahfuz, that it will happen, this is what Allah knows will happen. So to say that a wali can change what's in the Lawh al-Mahfuz would mean that a wali can change the knowledge of Allah. So it's not permissible for a person to believe that. This is not something acceptable. It would entail that that an attribute of Allah changes, or that it would entail that Allah is ignorant. And that is not permissible. That is in fact kufr. That would make a person a non-Muslim. So what is in the Lawh al-Mahfuz, it will not change. But a person shouldn't be agitated by that. Some people, they might say, well, if it's already written, then what's the point of me doing this and me doing that if it's already written? Well, the fact of the matter is you don't know what is written. So why don't you follow in the footsteps of the prophets and the pious people and go out and work? Work for the sake of Allah. Because this is what they did. And that doesn't mean, if you go and work, that doesn't mean that you have a weak reliance on Allah also. this is something that is good for the Prophets, alayhim salatu wassalam, worked, and likewise the pious people who followed them after them also worked. But what one has to beware of is haram money. Haram money. There are jobs that a person might do that are not permissible to do. So from that aspect, it would be haram. They would be sinful. And some of these jobs that are haram, the money that a person receives for doing these jobs also is haram. In other words, meaning that that money never becomes theirs. Even if they receive it, it never actually becomes theirs religiously. So they're not allowed to spend it because it's not theirs. Not allowed to spend something that's not yours. This is what is meant by the saying of the scholars, لا يدخل ملكه, that money doesn't enter into one's ownership. So a person needs to learn the details about that. Likewise, there are other examples of money that does enter one's ownership, but it's called malun makruh. Malun makruh. An example of the first is someone who sells, let's give an example, someone who sells something najis, filthy, like blood, urine, alcohol, pork. These things are religiously impure. They are not considered pure. And it's not permissible to sell them. It's not valid to sell them. So if somebody had one of these items, let's say, and they exchanged it with someone for some money, that money wouldn't enter their ownership. So they made the exchange. They gave this impure item to that person, and that person gave them some money. This money, even if it goes now into their pocket, literally, it does not enter their ownership, meaning they can't buy bread with it. They can't buy the weekly shopping with it. They would be committing a major sin. The money is not theirs. This is one example of haram money. There's an example now of makruh money, disliked money. If a person works in a shop where they sell what is not allowed to be sold, what is not valid for it to be sold. The sale isn't valid from the beginning, it's not valid. So someone works in such a store. They might not handle this item themselves, so they're not supporting, they're not aiding the sale of that item. They work in another part of the store, but they do sell this item, for example. They sell alcohol. So a person's wage, it comes from the sales, but it comes from a mixture of the sales, because they don't only sell alcohol, they sell lots of other things. They sell bread, they sell eggs, they sell many other things. But part of what they sell is alcohol, even though we know it's not valid to sell it and it's not permissible. But their wage comes from this. So because it's not known with certainty that the money they received was the exact money that was exchanged for the alcohol, because that's not known, otherwise it would have been haram. Because it's not known, but it could be potentially, this money therefore is called al-mal al-makruh, disliked money. So it enters, this wage enters that person's ownership, it becomes theirs, but it is money that has been now stamped with this label of being makruh. What does al-mal al-makruh mean? It means now if they take that money, the wage they've received, they take this money, for example, they received it in cash. So they take this money and it becomes theirs. It enters their pocket, it enters their ownership. Now, when they go to buy something with it, let's say they buy a pen. And when they buy this pen, the sale is valid. But then when it comes to using the pen, what has happened is that this item, the pen, was exchanged with disliked money, makruh money. And in that exchange, what happens is the judgment of it being makruh, the money being makruh, disliked, it transfers over now to the pen. This is how the scholars explained it. So using that pen is makruh because it was purchased with makruh money. And we know about something that is disliked when we do something that is disliked. It's not one of those things that you can get reward for doing. Like, what can we get reward for doing? An obligation, a fard, a wajib, a mustahab, a sunnah, or something that is mubah, permissible, if we have the proper intention. We can get reward for these things. What do we not get reward for? Something makruh, something that is a small sin, a major sin, and something that is kufr. So this item that has become makruh now, it carries this judgment. So one wouldn't be able to use it and intend that they are doing a good deed because the money has become, the item has become makruh. So these are rules of the religion that a person has to or should learn so that they can understand when it is that they are receiving reward for things and when is it that they are not receiving reward. Yes, someone might live and die and not know this thing about mal makruh. And they might make an intention for the sake of Allah that they're writing with the pen, but they didn't know, so they don't get any reward for that, of course, because, and so on. But a person who really takes care of these issues, they would learn the details and then they would implement them. And then they would see the results of that on the Day of Judgment. They would see, inshallah, great stores of reward. As opposed to those people who didn't learn the way in which to acquire deeds, good deeds, or reward for them. They will be surprised and disappointed on the Day of Judgment with themselves, firstly, that they didn't learn. And as a result, they will see very little reward, or much less than they had expected, because they didn't learn. And this is a better situation than the one that not only did they not learn, but they engaged in a lot of haram. They engaged in a lot of haram. In transactions, any transaction or anything that is sinful, that then you exchange money for, it becomes a major sin. So the matters of money are very important in this sense for a person to learn about them so that they can know if the transaction is valid, firstly. Because if it was invalid and a person on top of that paid money for this invalid transaction, it becomes a major sin, as is mentioned by our Shaykh in his Mukhtasar, rahimahullah. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said, as was narrated by Al-Bukhari, إِنَّ أُنَاسًا يَتَخَوَّضُونَ فِي مَالِ اللَّهِ بِغَيْرِ حَقٍّ فَلَهُمُ النَّارُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. There are people that don't learn the rules of the religion, or they do, but they don't implement them. These people will be buying, selling, using money, trading, setting up businesses, companies, doing things that are haram, and by that they would be meddling in what Allah owns, and they would be behaving or administering, even using this money in a way that Allah does not accept. They would be using it in a way that is against the rules that Allah set. He owns everything, and He set rules. So a person, the Prophet said, alayhi salatu wasalam, a person would come in this world and they would use that which Allah owns in a way that Allah doesn't accept. If in this life you give somebody something to use and they use it in a way different to what you accept, that doesn't please you, does it? You don't accept that because they broke the rule. You gave them your phone to use for a day because their own phone broke. You went to their house and you saw them using your phone as a hammer. You don't accept that. Well, I hope you don't. You don't accept that, do you? Allah owns everything. Allah owns the oceans. Allah owns the clouds. Allah owns everything. All the currencies, all the metals in the world, Allah owns them. All the grains of sand, all the fields of wheat and corn, Allah owns them all. And Allah set limits to how we are to use these items, these products, when exchanging them for other products. So someone who doesn't follow the rules, he is meddling in an inappropriate way in what Allah owns. So the Prophet ﷺ said, فَلَهُمْ, these people, فَلَهُمُ النَّارُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. These people will be exposed to fire on the Day of Judgment. These people will be exposed to fire on the Day of Judgment because of the major sins that they committed with regards to money. So it's important for a person to know that their rizq is written. And to fulfill the obligations, they should strive. They should go out and seek to acquire rizq to fulfill their obligations, whilst having reliance upon Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. And again, going out to acquire this sustenance, it is not a sign of weak tawakkul ala Allah. It's not a sign of having weak reliance upon Allah. No. Why? Because the prophets, they did that. The prophets worked as the Shaykh mentioned. Walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad Rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Say la ilaha illallah and as-salah ala nabi. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. لا إله إلا الله. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.